Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for attending our virtual forum on protecting democracy with Congressman Malinowski, Congressman Sarbanes, and Tiffany Muller of End Citizens United. We're going to just get started right away. I'm going to hand off right away to Congressman Malinowski so he can get us going. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you to our special guests, to my dear friend and colleague, Congressman Sarbanes from Maryland, who has been our leader in the House of Representatives in fighting for campaign finance reform, for safe and secure elections, for ethics reform, and Tiffany Muller, the president of End Citizens United, which is dedicated to ending Citizens United, a great organizational name. It tells you everything you need to know. And I've been working with them very closely since before I was elected. During my campaign in 2018, they both came down to Flemington, where we did a live version of the forum that we're going to do again today. We had a huge turnout on a freezing cold winter day in the middle of that campaign, and I thought that was just an inspiring reminder of how much support there is among the American people for reforming our elections and our campaign finance system and to make democracy work better for everybody. Look, a lot has happened since then. Perhaps the most dramatic moment in the debate on securing and reforming our democracy, to me, came just 1 month ago in Wisconsin, when we saw something that we should never, ever, ever have seen in the United States of America. People being forced literally to choose between their right to vote and their right to life. I've seen that happen in Afghanistan. I've seen that happen in Iraq. I've seen that happening in war-torn countries around the world, not in the United States of America. And you know how that came about. The governor of Wisconsin, in the middle of this coronavirus, tried to postpone a primary election so that it could go all vote by mail. And a partisan legislature said, no, we're going to force people to go out and risk their lives. And it makes you stop and think, like, what has happened in this country of ours? We, for many decades, it seemed as if we were making progress. We had the Voting Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s. We had all kinds of positive actions at the state level to make it easier for people to register to vote. Motor voter, you can get registered when you get your driver's license and so forth. But in the last decade or so, I would say there has been a movement in this country to reverse that. There has been a movement in this country to make it easier to be a campaign donor and harder to be a voter. And in the case of Wisconsin, even dangerous to be a voter in America. We saw the Citizens United decision, of course. We've seen extreme partisan gerrymandering aided by technology in a number of states. We've seen courts exercising less supervision over elections to make sure that people's civil rights are protected, to make sure that blatant voter suppression does not happen. And so in the 2018 campaign, I ran on those issues, and I'm not alone. A lot of candidates across the country in that congressional election ran on an agenda of fixing our democracy. We demanded that our future congressional leadership, if we were elected, take this up as their top priority. And indeed, after we were elected under Congressman Sarbanes' leadership, we drafted a bill called H.R. 1, the first bill introduced in the House in that term, that took on ethics reform, that took on campaign finance and dark money in our politics, that took on partisan gerrymandering. I'm sure we'll hear more about it from Congressman Sarbanes. We passed it in the House. And as I suppose one might have predicted, it has ever since been blocked by the main opponent of reform in our country today, Senator Mitch McConnell, the leader of the United States Senate. And then the coronavirus crisis came along, and a number of us thought, okay, here's something that everyone ought to agree on. It's simple, that if it becomes too dangerous to vote in the general election because this epidemic is still spreading this November, at least people ought to be able to vote by mail, as they can in many states. And in fact, there are some states in America where all elections are 100% vote by mail. So we put that provision, a mandate that every state should allow that, in the CARES Act, our first big coronavirus bill. And once again, Senator McConnell blocked it. This got a little bit partisan in Washington. It's not partisan among the American people. It's not partisan among my constituents here in the 7th District. I hear from everybody about this, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, but it's gotten a bit partisan in Washington, D.C. You guys may have heard President Trump when he was asked about that provision that we were trying to pass in the House of Representatives say, you know, man, there were levels of voting in that bill that if that had been allowed, not a single Republican would win an election in America ever again. And I thought that was an incredibly revealing statement. It's actually not true, by the way. There's no evidence that if we had easy voting for everyone in America, that it would favor one party or another. But it just shows you the mindset that some people have just decided that the only way they can win is by making it harder and, in fact, more dangerous for our fellow Americans to vote. And it's even gotten partisan in the politics of New Jersey. I'm running for re-election this year, as you all know, and my opponent and the Republican Party nationally attacked me for daring to try to put provisions in a coronavirus bill to make it safe for people to vote. My opponent, Tom Kean, is a state senator, and interestingly, over the last 10 years, he's voted against every bill in the New Jersey State Senate to make it easier for New Jerseyans to vote. He voted against the law that is in place, fortunately, in New Jersey, that allows every New Jerseyan to vote by mail, no excuse, for any reason that we want. Thank goodness he lost that fight, because we now have the choice, the freedom to vote safely, even if the coronavirus is back in the fall. So there is a choice here that we're going to have to make. And we're going to have to, in my view, approach elections with this issue in mind. We have to make voting a voting issue in America if we're going to change things for the better and elect a Congress in 2020 that's actually going to pass H.R. 1 that is going to do what the vast majority of the American people demand. So with that, I look forward to your questions, but I want to, I know we all want to hear from Congressman Sarbanes and from Tiffany. I think the congressman is going first. Is that right, Lauren? So let me turn it over to you.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Tom, for having me on the call. First of all, let me speak directly to your supporters out there and thank you for electing Tom Malinowski to come to Washington. That forum that Tiffany and I'm very pleased that Tiffany's joining us today as well, but that we came and did with Tom down the stretch in the 2018 cycle was one of the most uplifting events I think I've done in the last few years anywhere in the country. And I remember, Tom, and you'll remember this too, there was someone who stood up and asked us, you know, would we really follow through if given the chance to get the gavel back in Washington? Would we go make the changes and enact the reforms that we were promising on that day we would do to clean up our campaign finance system, to make it easier, not harder to vote, to insist on ethics and accountability in Washington, to fix partisan gerrymandering, all those things that we presented to people. And this fella got up and said, I want to believe you, but I've heard it so many times before. And what I said was, I hear it, I get it, but trust us. Trust that we will try to make this happen. And you followed through on that, Tom, because you were one of the leaders of the H.R. 1 effort. When you came to Washington, you brought the gavel with you, you and your class in 2018. And we were able to pass H.R. 1, the most transformative anti-corruption and clean elections bill in the last 50 years, and do it within the first 100 days. So it was quite an accomplishment. And so I want to credit your supporters out there for sending you, and I want to certainly beseech them to send you back again. And I know you're in a tough election right now. Nothing can be taken for granted. So every little bit of support and help that we can bring to Tom to make sure that we have him back next year when we hope to have the chance to pass H.R. 1 again in the House. And if we've got the Senate and a White House that's also ready to do the right thing, we can make it law. So I want to thank you for all of your advocacy. There's no question right now, as you pointed out, that in addition to people obviously being concerned about the health situation right now and the economic dislocation, they also want to make sure that they can have a safe election in November. And what's happened with these primaries and some of the special elections is we're getting a tutorial on lessons learned to make sure that we do conduct a safe election in the fall where everyone has access to the ballot. And that means we have to expand significantly vote by mail opportunities across the country, something that Democrats have pushed for very hard in recent efforts on Capitol Hill, and we're going to be pushing again in the upcoming relief package that we're looking at right now, to make sure that we have robust opportunities for early voting so that people can choose that option. And certainly to ensure that when it gets to election day, that we have safe polling places. We can do both. We can have vote by mail and we can have good in-person voting that's done safely. They just did this in South Korea, by the way. They pulled off an election without exposing anybody significantly to infection, even in the midst of this pandemic. So it's a matter of having the resources to do it. And Tom and I and Tiffany, working with End Citizens United and many others, are pushing very hard right now to insist that in the next round of assistance that comes out to the country, it include robust funding to help election officials on the ground across the country make sure that come November we can have a safe election where everybody has the right to vote. The fact of the matter is, while this issue does get politicized, unfortunately, and Tom described that, if you get down to the local level, a lot of these election officials take deep pride in conducting elections and making sure they go off safely and that everybody comes away from it feeling empowered. And if we can get them the resources to do the vote by mail, to make sure that there's safe early voting and election day opportunities for people to cast their ballot, that's the most important thing. And we're going to be pushing very, very hard for that in the next round. So Tom, thank you for your continued leadership in this space. You were there from the beginning as a champion of H.R. 1 and fixing our democracy and fighting corruption. We need to keep you there as a leader in this effort. We're determined to do that. And I know that the people that are joining us this evening are just as determined. So thanks for the opportunity. Look forward to the questions.
Thank you, John. Tiffany? You're still muted.
Tiffany, you're still on mute.
There we go. There we go. Really, technology. Thank you so much, Congressman Malinowski and Congressman Sarbanes. And thank you to everyone for joining us today and taking time out of your Friday evening to join us. And I hope that each and every one of you and your families are safe and well during this unprecedented time. And thank you for bearing with us while we all continue to figure out things like how to unmute ourselves on Zoom calls. I continue to struggle with some of these things. I am Tiffany Muller. I'm the president and executive director of End Citizens United and Let America Vote. And our organization was founded to end the influence of big money in politics and to make sure that every American has the right and access to vote. And for those who, as Congressman Malinowski said, who are tracking our name, we know that the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court in January 2010 was one of the most disastrous decisions of our lifetime, that took two really terrible ideas and merged them together and said, corporations are people and money equals speech. And it really put a for sale sign on our democracy. And we have seen those consequences play out in elections across the country, but also in the public policy debates that happen in Washington. And right now, we're facing these unprecedented times. Coronavirus has caused so many problems, and our very first priority has to be that we're taking care of all Americans who have been so deeply impacted by this virus. But at the same time, we have to protect our democracy and our democratic process. And we can do this. We can actually make sure that people have the right to vote and can vote safely and not have to choose between their public health and the right to vote. And I know you've heard it many times before, but November 2020 truly will be the most important election of our lifetimes. And it is no surprise that the Republicans in Washington have been blocking all efforts to address this voting access crisis and to expand the right to vote. They have been too busy prioritizing corporate special interest bailouts and making sure that hundreds of millions of dollars have gone to Fortune 100 companies. And that's no surprise, really. Our entire system right now is rigged to favor those who can write the biggest check. And that's why we need the leadership of Congressman Malinowski and Congressman Sarbanes in Congress, because every single day, they are providing a voice for everyday American people. We need a Washington that is providing clear guidance and funding to help show the way so that we never see what happened in Wisconsin happen again in states across the country. And that's why at Let America Vote, we have actually launched a Safe Democracy Project. And this is a 50-state grassroots effort to put pressure on our public officials to do the simple things that both representatives were talking about. First, we have to make sure that every single person who wants to vote by mail has that option and that they can do so without an excuse. Number two, we need to make sure that in-person voting can be done safely so that for folks who need to vote on election day, they can do so without risking their health. Third, we need to expand early in-person voting. And fourth, we need to make sure that all states have the funding necessary to implement these changes. And right now, experts are estimating that that's about $4 billion. So I want to thank both Congressman Malinowski and Congressman Sarbanes for their leadership on these efforts and for continuing to fight both in the previous care packages and in the upcoming legislation as well. And look, if we're going to expand voting access, we also have to pass comprehensive campaign finance reform, because we know that the same people who want to block access to the ballot box are the same people who support unlimited and undisclosed funding in our elections to buy elections. These problems are linked, and our solutions really must be linked as well. And that's why Congressman Malinowski's voice in Congress is so important. He campaigned on this issue. He talked about the need for reform. Both of them mentioned the event that I had the great honor and privilege to join them both at in 2018. And his clarity on the reasons that we had to make sure that we reformed our democratic process are his life's work. And it is what he has gone to Washington and followed through on. The very first bill that he co-sponsored as a member of Congress was H.R. 1. You heard both of them describe that bill, but it truly is the biggest anti-corruption package that we've seen in our lifetime. And that wouldn't have been possible without the leadership of Congressman Sarbanes, who was truly the architect of this bill. He not only put the bill together, but he helped shepherd it through the caucus. And we got it passed unanimously with Democratic support on March 8th of 2019. And it's sat on Mitch McConnell's desk ever since. But we can change that. Again, November 2020 is the most important election of our time. And one thing we have the opportunity to do is give Mitch McConnell a new job. And I am all for that. Congressman Malinowski's leadership on this issue didn't just start when he got to Congress. This has truly been his life's work. When he was at the State Department, he represented America's interests on both human rights and democracy around the world. And he understands how corruption can undermine a democratic process. So we have to keep him in office. And this is one of the toughest districts in our country. And there is no doubt that the special interests are going to come in and try to buy this election. And his opponent, Tom Kean, is already in the pocket of corporate special interests. He's taken $1.2 million from corporate special interests, and he has voted against cracking down on surprise medical billing. He voted against expanding prescription drug coverage for seniors and those with disabilities. And he voted against protections for pre-existing conditions. Not only that, as you heard from Congressman Malinowski, he voted against efforts that thankfully passed to expand vote by mail and against automatic voter registration. There is no question who Tom Kean is working for in the state Senate. And there's absolutely no question about who Tom Malinowski is working for in Washington, D.C. And that's for each and every one of you every single day. So the stakes are high, and we really need you. So the first and foremost thing is we got to make sure that every one of you and your family and friends are registered to vote. And if you want to sign up to get vote by mail, and you can do so at njelections.org. And then please, look, now the lights are going off. All kinds of things are happening over here. And please volunteer your time and your efforts to make sure that we get Tom Malinowski back to Washington. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. All right.
All so much. You ready for questions?
Yeah, let's have some.
We have some pre-submitted questions. So I was going to read each question to one of you, and then all three of you, if you don't mind, to chime in one at a time. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily all have to take all of them, but
you're really
just, okay. Go ahead. You're in charge, not me.
All right, Tiffany, I was going to start with you because it kind of segues with what you just said, this first question. So many of us saw what happened earlier this month in Wisconsin, where people were forced to choose between voting and their health, and polling location closures resulted in hours of lines. Just this week, the upcoming primary in New York was canceled. What steps can we take now to ensure we hold an election in November, that the election is conducted safely, and that it is legitimate and fair?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you so much. And, that's exactly what our Safe Democracy Project really aims to achieve. First, we need Congress to provide more election preparedness funding. I think a number of us mentioned it, but so far only $400 million has been allocated in the CARES package. That's about $3.6 billion short of the $4 billion that experts are calling for. So we know that in this next package, we really need more funding to make sure that states have the resources they need to implement the election preparedness that's going to be needed for November. We also need to implement a national no excuse vote by mail option for November. Look, anyone who wants to vote by mail should have the option to do so. And right now, about 2/3 of the states do have that, but that still leaves, I think it's 16 states where an excuse is required. So we need to make sure that everybody has the option to vote by mail. And we need to add additional safeguards to make sure that in-person voting can be done safely. So we need to expand the length of early voting. Most people are recommending at least 20 days of in-person early voting in order to thin out the crowds and make sure there aren't those long lines. And then we need to make sure that anyone who shows up on election day, that there's enough polling locations, that there's the cleanliness and sanitation needed, and even things like the coming to the door of the car to vote. Again, Congressman Malinowski and Congressman Sarbanes have really been leading this fight. They fought to protect our elections every step of the way. And they're fighting Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, who are really standing in the way of progress.
Thank you. Congressman Sarbanes, do you want to add to that?
Just super quick. I just want to say to people on the phone, like, this is the moment when we need you to be sending emails, making phone calls to people in Washington and telling them that having a safe election has got to be a priority in the next bill. If we don't, and here's why. If we don't get the funding to the election officials soon, they're not going to be able to build the infrastructure to actually conduct the election in a safe fashion come November. In other words, you can't give them that money in September and October and expect to have an election that works. We've got to get it out there now. Republicans and Democrats on the ground who conduct these elections, they're crying for this money. They need it to conduct election. Why? Because they know the American public wants to have a safe election. So this is the time to weigh in, to show Tom and me and others in Washington that you consider this a high priority, that you want us to fight for it, fight as much as we can, to send a message to McConnell and his crowd that this has got to be a number one priority for funding. So I encourage people, the fight is now. We don't want to see the kind of train wreck and chaos that we saw in Wisconsin. We want people to wake up on November 4th and feel like they had a chance to exercise their franchise in what we believe to be the greatest democracy in the world. And now is the time to make the push.
Thank you. Congressman Malinowski, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd just add that the last time we had this fight over the first CARES Act, that was just before Wisconsin. And since then, something very dramatic has happened that has shown the American people how urgent this is and how relevant this is to the coronavirus epidemic. This isn't just about somebody trying to tack on an unrelated issue to an emergency bill to help people survive this epidemic. This is critical to surviving this epidemic. And so I think we've got an even stronger argument. As John said, this is the time to be making it. I don't know if it's going to be enough to move Mitch McConnell, who seems to be pretty shameless, but we either move him or we shame him and take it from there. And meanwhile, we're fighting this at the state level as well. We're gradually, state by state, getting to where we need to be. Pennsylvania has moved to no excuse vote by mail. New Hampshire, just a few weeks ago after Wisconsin, the Republican governor embraced for the first time the idea everybody should have the freedom to vote by mail. So I think one way or another, we're going to get there. And if there are still states in this country that don't allow it in November and the epidemic is an issue, I think we're going to see something else that also happened in Wisconsin, which is people said, you know what, I'm so damn angry that those people are trying to suppress my vote that I'm going to vote with extra vigor and extra determination, and I'm going to vote against them.
Thank you so much. Congressman Sarbanes, I'm going to give you the next question to start off, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Opponents of vote by mail and early voting have criticized it as being less secure and have argued that it gives an advantage to one party or another. Do you see this as a partisan issue? What other reforms do we need to ensure our elections are open and fair?
Well, there's actually no clear evidence. I mean, Tom mentioned this on the front end of the call, that vote by mail helps one party over the other. I mean, there's no question the Republicans seem to be nervous about it, nervous about the idea of making it easier for people to vote in America. So you can draw conclusions from that if you want to. But there's no hard evidence that on balance it's going to net out in favor of one party or another, particularly because, you know, we have a very decentralized system. We have 50 different states. They all have their own political makeup and so forth. So I think that it should not be a partisan issue. Actually, the polling, there's a recent poll just in the last few days that shows strong bipartisan support for voting by mail, and also support for the idea we got to put some resources behind it and do that soon. So I'm pretty confident that the broad public supports this effort. In terms of the security, you got to build certain kind of validation and verification things into a vote by mail system, but we have the capacity to do that. If these election officials can get the dollars they need, they can build those systems. And where those systems have operated with the right kind of security protections in place, there's no evidence of fraud or any other kind of mischief going on when it comes to vote by mail. It can be a very robust and reliable way for people to cast their vote. So let's just do it. I mean, it's incredible that here we are in the 21st century. And again, what we do deeply believe to be the greatest democracy in the country. And we still have all these hoops and obstacles to people trying to cast their vote, which in a democracy is the greatest form of protest and registering your voice. So here's our chance. Let's show the world, let's show ourselves that our democracy is resilient, that no pandemic can stop us from raising our voices up in what, as Tiffany said, is clearly the most important election of our lifetime. We can do this. And people are looking to November and understanding that they want to both be safe and exercise their franchise. That's what this effort is all about.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Congressman Malinowski, would you like to add to that?
Sure. So number one, it doesn't matter from a partisan point of view. It's true in New Jersey that in recent years, Democrats have done better with mail-in votes than Republicans. But hey, we have 1 million more Democrats than Republicans in New Jersey. And I think the Democratic candidates have just consciously, deliberately organized vote by mail more effectively than Republicans. And I also think Republicans are trying to catch up right now, which is exactly what they should be doing. But then you have other states like Utah, which is a obviously reliably Republican conservative state where they have 100% vote by mail. Everybody votes by mail. In other states that have gone 100% vote by mail, there's been no evidence that it's benefited either Democrats or Republicans, that it's changed anything other than making it easier for people to vote. So that's number one. Number two, it shouldn't matter. I have confidence in my convictions. And I believe that, number one, everyone should vote. And if they do, my convictions can prevail because I think they're right. I can persuade anybody to vote for me, is what I believe every day when I wake up and I go out and talk to voters. And most of the Republican politicians I know also have confidence in their convictions. And I think most of them deep down believe, or at least they should believe, the same thing, that they ought to be able to convince anyone in this country to believe what they believe in and to vote for them. There are plenty of folks in this district who are eager to vote for me in November. There are plenty who are eager to vote for somebody else. They should all be able to do so without risking their lives.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, there's not much to add from what Congressman Sarbanes and Congressman Malinowski said. I would add on to the very end of Congressman Malinowski's comments there and say, I urge you all to vote for Congressman Malinowski. We know how important his voice is. But they're both right. All of the studies have shown that this does not have a partisan advantage. And, you know, throughout our history, our country has really been about expanding the franchise to vote. And that's what we're talking about. And that's what we're fighting for, is how can everyone have the right to access the ballot box? Any type of evidence about fraud has been, put to rest. All of the studies have shown that there is no large fraud with vote by mail. As a matter of fact, the president thought it was safe enough for him to use just a few months ago in Florida. So Republicans across the country have been using vote by mail for years. And right now in Washington, for instance, the Secretary of State is a Republican, and her state and her efforts are helping lead the way and pave the way for other states who are looking to implement this before Election Day. So it is hard to take Mitch McConnell and his prognostications very seriously about this.
Thank you so much. Congressman Malinowski, I'm going to send the next one to you to start off. The coronavirus pandemic has not only exposed challenges with ensuring a safe election, but it has also deepened significant cracks in our healthcare system. People are losing their insurance when they are laid off. Their premiums are going up. They're concerned about being able to afford treatment or even their regular prescriptions. These aren't new issues, but it feels like progress is constantly being blocked by special interests. What reforms do we need to break through and make real progress?
Yeah, it's a great question because it helps to illustrate why we call campaign finance reform and fixing our democracy issue number one, because it touches every other issue that affects our lives. The crisis has absolutely exposed flaws in our healthcare system, inequities in our healthcare system. We've been arguing for years that nobody should have to worry about losing their health insurance if they lose their jobs. And now 20% of the American people have lost their jobs or are unemployed. We've argued nobody should have to worry about health care if they have a personal crisis. And now all of us are in the middle of a crisis. And so Congress is scrambling and the administration is scrambling to, for the purposes of coronavirus, guarantee universal health care in this country. The administration is almost at a point where they're willing to be for Medicare for all for coronavirus. But many of us think that there should be universal health care for everything, cancer and heart disease and for primary care and preventive care, so that all of us are healthier. And the question that brings us back to the start of our discussion is, why doesn't that happen? Because the vast majority of the American people want that to happen, just as the vast majority of the American people want to see action taken to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Most people believe that we should allow Medicare to negotiate the price of prescription drugs with our pharmaceutical companies. Overwhelmingly, Republicans believe that as well, Republican voters. And then it doesn't happen. Why is that? It can only be explained by one thing, and that is that too many elected officials are listening to their donors before they listen to their voters. Because as a practical matter, as I said, it's become easier to be a donor than to be a voter in America. And that means if you're a politician and you want to stay in office, you increasingly, consciously or unconsciously, you're thinking about mobilizing money before you think about mobilizing people. And that money has a very different point of view than those people. That money is telling you, don't reform the healthcare system, don't lower the cost of prescription drugs, don't do the things that the vast majority of Americans are demanding. And so that's why we're here, because we care about the healthcare system and the environment and gun violence and national security and 1,000 other issues where the outcome should be determined by the voices of the American people, not the money.
Thank you so much. Congressman Sarbanes, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, Tom did a great job of talking about that influence that the special interests have over the system. Look, chickens come home to roost on this, and unfortunately that's happening right now in the midst of a pandemic. The fact is, I was there when we were passing the ACA, and we were trying to get a public option that would have dramatically increased the number of people that would be covered in this country by this moment. If we had gotten that in place back then, you'd have a lot more people that would have health insurance coverage in place for them at this critical moment in time. And I was there and I saw what happened, which was the health insurance industry and other special interests shut that down. And the way they shut it down was they pulled the strings. They were the donor class. And they reminded legislators of what kind of contributions they had made. And they held that over their head. And the result was that we couldn't get policy done that would help the broad public out there. and make it more possible for people to access health care in this country. And now millions of Americans, millions of our fellow citizens are paying for that special interest leaning on the scale, because the policymaking apparatus too often, as that case illustrates, leans towards the donor class. It leans towards the special interest. It leans towards the money people and away from everyday Americans. One way you change that, and one critical piece of H.R. 1 that was championed by Tom and myself and so many others that Tiffany worked for, was to create a whole new way of funding campaigns in America, so that we can power campaigns with small donations and matching funds, so candidates don't have to rely on lobbyists and deep pockets and wealthy donors and special interests, so they don't have to rely on corporate PACs. And thank you, Tom Malinowski, for taking the corporate PAC-free pledge and sticking with that, which is incredibly hard to do because you are trying to change the culture in Washington. It takes a lot of political courage to do that. And I'm saying that because I hope people on this call, I know you support Tom, but I gotta tell you, for him to stick with that pledge as he has done shows a level of courage and an effort to change the culture in Washington that we all need to step behind and support, so he can continue to represent New Jersey in the U.S. Congress. So we want to build a new way of funding campaigns where the people are in charge, where they own the system, where they own the priorities when it comes to policy. And the beauty of our proposal is we're actually going to pay for that system by putting a surcharge on settlements that the government enters into with these industry lawbreakers and these high-end tax cheats. So what's that mean? We're going to go to the people that have broken our democracy by leaning on it, the big corporations and the wealthy, and we're going to have them be the ones to pay to fix this democracy, because that's how it ought to work. So let's take back control of how policy is made in Washington by having the people step up and own the system. If we had been able to do that 10 years ago, we'd have a healthcare system in place right now that would be much better serving the American people in the midst of this terrible pandemic. So this is a number one issue. And again, I want to thank Tom for his leadership and his courage on this. And I'm beseeching all of you out there who are supporting Tom to keep stepping up for him, because he is in a tough election. But he's the guy we got to bring back next year.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, this is what our organization's all about. We literally are set up, we're a grassroots organization made up of 4 million people across the country who have joined together because they believe that right now Washington is working better for the special interest and the lobbyists and the donors than the everyday American people. And you know what? They're right? Like, let's take the pharmaceutical industry. On any given day, there are 1,500 lobbyists representing pharma on Capitol Hill. That is 3 for every member of Congress. And how are everyday people supposed to have a voice in that system when they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year on the elections, giving hundreds of millions of dollars in PAC contributions, and flooding Capitol Hill with lobbyists? No matter, as both Congressman Sarbanes and Congressman Malinowski said, every single issue we care about and that we hope to make progress on, if you look at what's blocking it, it is the big donors and the corporate special interests standing in the way. Climate change is one of my favorite examples, and not favorite examples. If you look at climate change, prior to the Citizens United decision, there were 14 instances of Senate Republicans joining with Democrats to come up with solutions to address climate change and what's happening to our environment and to our world. And since the Citizens United decision, there have been 0, because these elected officials have taken a look around and they've decided to throw in with the money instead of with the people. But we actually, That's all really awful. But I'm actually hopeful, and I'm hopeful because of what we're seeing happen across the country. I'm hopeful because in 2018, we elected 63 new members of the House of Representatives, all of who the very first thing they did was work with leadership and Congressman Sarbanes and made H.R. 1 the very first bill that they put forward, because they understand that if they're going to restore the American people's faith in our government, that first they have to change the way it's working. Right? And so they went and did the courageous thing. The easy thing is to sell out. The easy thing is to get tied up with the money. The easy thing is to do what everyone else has been doing. The hard thing is to stand up for those principles and to say, no, we're going to change this. And we're going to actually make progress on all of these other top priority issues for Americans as well. So here in Citizens United, this is what we get up and work on every single day. And we do it with an average contribution of $13. And I have people who write me notes who say, I don't know how my $15 can stand up against the Koch's money, but please, go make change. And you know what? When it's $15 and it's combined with 4 million people across the country, that makes a real difference. And so thank you to all of you who are on this call who helped bring about change by electing Tom Malinowski, who are supporting reform efforts. It is because of your voice that we've been able to do what we've been able to do. And I am convinced that in January 2021, we're going to actually be able to get H.R. 1 signed into law.
God, I hope so. Thank you so much. I have another question for you, Tiffany. I'll start off with, most of us aren't in Congress, so what can people at home do to make sure that we're protecting our elections and that our votes count?
Well, first and foremost, that's a fantastic question. We have to make sure that each and every one of you are registered to vote. And then, like I said before, we need you to make sure your family and friends are registered to vote. And we need you to request and complete your ballot. You can download the form at njelections.org. You can reach out to Tom's campaign to volunteer with them. He's running a grassroots powered campaign. He really relies on everyday people like you to help out and do their part. The most important thing that you can do also is to raise your voice. Contact your elected officials. You're on this call. You're already engaged. Make sure your network of friends and family do the same, and just keep being involved. So that is the main thing.
Thank you. Congressman Sarbanes, anything else we should be doing?
I don't think so. I think Tiffany touched on all the points. But while we're at home, obviously the opportunity to reach out to people and build structures remotely, phone calls, texting, Zoom meetings, these ways of gathering people up, and in particular educating them, as she mentioned, on what it means to vote by mail. Every state's going to be different. New Jersey has its rules. You got to make sure that you're meeting all of the different requirements so that your vote is going to count. But frankly, as you become experts yourself on this, you should broaden out your circle and educate others. That's the way this is going to happen. People need to have confidence. The other thing is get started on all of this as early as the system allows you to do so, because there's always going to be glitches, things that come along. The more lead time we have in terms of engaging people and getting them behind this vote effort, the more time we'll have to address any problems that come up. And we definitely don't want anything to get in the way of Tom's reelection. We need to get him back to be the leader on reform and on so many other issues that he's been.
Thank you. Congressman Malinowski, anything you want to add to that?
Thank you. So first of all, I think just the turnout today shows the level of interest. When we had that forum in Flemington, it was a packed house, but we have more people online in this virtual, less than fully satisfying format than we did live for that event. And that just suggests to me that interest is building and building, and people running for office are going to feel that. I think what we all have to do as voters is, as I suggested at the openings, we have to make this a voting issue. This is a congressional district full of well-educated people who do vote on the issues. They vote based on information, and they're going to need to have information about where the candidates stand on this, whether it's my race against Tom Kean or the presidential race, the Senate race, local races. Make sure that you know where the candidates stand on these issues and that your friends and your neighbors know. We know that everybody cares about this, but they need to have the information to be able to vote on that basis. And that's where every single person on this call can be an ambassador to tens, dozens, hundreds of others.
Thank you. And we're going to take a couple of live questions, but right before then, I'd like to just piggyback on what you just said and let anybody know out there if they want to help out your campaign. We have several initiatives right now going on. We are going to start another drive to collect food for our food banks in the district. We just surpassed 5,000 check-in calls. We've been checking in on all our neighbors, seniors mostly, throughout the district to see if they're okay, to see if they need anything. We'd love volunteers to continue in that regard. And we're also helping out the Chamber of Commerce with our Rally for Restaurants to keep local businesses in business as we go through these hard times. So if anyone's interested, please reach out to me, reach out to Daniel Fleiss, any of us. And thank you so much. Okay. Do we have a question?
I think we have one in the chat. So from Marianne, what can be done to make sure the post office is able to handle the increased VBM volume expected in November?
Well, John, we have to make sure there's still a post office, number one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm on the oversight committee that has jurisdiction with respect to U.S. Postal Service, and we are pushing very hard to make sure that the Postal Service has the funding it needs to do all the things that it's doing. Actually, I think something like 90% of Americans have a positive impression and opinion when it comes to the post office. They understand, particularly under these circumstances, how hard the postal workers are striving to meet the needs of people across the country. We can't thank them enough for that. But if we're going to be standing up a significant increase in voting by mail, then we have to make sure that the post office has the resources and the support that goes with that. And we're certainly pushing for that. We're hoping to include some funding for the post office in the next round of package that we put together. So it's a very timely and appropriate question. We do need to support the post office.
I think we'll take one more question. So has the economical impact of unemployment and of increased donations to community care been affecting level of grassroots donations to campaigns?
It's the least of my concerns right now, but yes, of course. And I think that's probably true for everybody. It's true for my campaign. It's true, I assume, for my opponent's campaign. So, we still have to continue our campaign because, as I often say, the one thing we cannot postpone in America is the November election. We can postpone the baseball season. We can postpone rock concerts. We can't postpone November, the choice that we have to make. So we have to be ready. So we're still raising funds, but always with the understanding and the caveat that we know that a lot of people are hurting, and that our health, our safety, our family's well-being has to come first.
Can I just say something real quick? Yes, I'm sure it's impacting Tom's opponent as it's impacting Tom, but I don't think that his opponent has taken a pledge not to take corporate PAC money.
No, he has not.
No, he hasn't. So he's got other recourse in circumstances like this. Tom has taken that pledge. As I said, it shows tremendous political courage, but it means that grassroots support is even more critical in terms of his reelection. And I certainly respect his being sensitive to the fact that in these conditions, we have to understand that people have other obligations and needs that they're attending to. But to the extent people can put aside a little bit of money to support Tom at this critical moment, I know he would deeply appreciate that. I know we're getting to the end of the call. I just wanted to say to the people in your district, Tom, that you did hit a home run with this guy Malinowski. I mean, he's absolutely real and genuine. It was clear to us from day one. Everything he does is motivated by wanting to respond to the needs of the people in his district and to be a good legislator and a good listener. We cannot take anything for granted. I haven't been around for a real long time, but I've been around long enough to see political fortunes change in a moment. I remember being there for the Obama inauguration in 2008 with the Democratic House and the Democratic Senate, and it seemed like blue skies forever. You can't take the people that serve you well for granted. You have that in Tom. I hope that you understand how motivating his presence in Congress has been for me and a lot of other people, and I hope you'll do everything you can to send them back.
Yeah, I want to echo that as well. It has been such an honor and a privilege to get to do this event with you today and to have gotten to travel to the district and do events there as well, and to have gotten to know you, Tom, through your service. You are the type of representative that we need in Washington. You are the type of leader who is bringing about real change, and you're doing it for the right reasons because you truly believe in public service and giving back and making sure that everyday people have a voice in our government. Thank you so much for your leadership, for your partnership, and we are proud to stand with you and encourage everyone on the call today to do everything you can to make sure that you get Tom Malinowski back to Congress.
Thank you. I'll just close by saying that my friend John Sarbanes was working on all this stuff before the 2018 election. He was working on HR 1, introducing legislation, trying to push this stuff forward. End Citizens United was advocating for it in the House of Representatives, but it wasn't going anywhere until all of us came together in our district and district just like it to elect that Democratic majority in the House of Representatives that enabled John and all of us to take those ideas and to turn them into legislation that actually passed the House of Representatives. We're going to have to do that for the Senate. We're going to have to do that for the White House, but it just shows that all of us have that power. It takes hard work, a lot of investment, but when we do it, it brings very, very real results, and it starts with us. So thank you guys so much for dropping in virtually. Next time we'll have you back live and in person. And thanks to everybody else for spending an hour of, I hope, what was an interesting discussion for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.